No matter how you look at the game Final Fantasy VII, be it positively, negatively, or indifferent, the game is without a doubt iconic. Its place in history has been cemented by not only its fanbase, but the enduring legacy it's brought to the franchise and gaming as a whole. So much so, there was an almost rabid cry for the game to be remade using new technology, to which, after many years, the cry was answered in 2020. But what about this game makes it so enduring? Is it the story? The characters? The fantastic world Square created? There are so many answers to this question, and I don't even know how to begin to answer. All I can really do is offer my perspective. This is not a review of the game, as you can see by the title. This is an analysis of sorts of the game's protagonist, Cloud Strife, through the lens of yours truly throughout the years. My outlook and attitude towards this character has changed drastically over time, and I think now I'm ready to reconcile my thoughts and share this perspective with you. For reference, at the time of me posting this video, I have not yet played Remake, so I will not be using the new continuity as reference. With that out of the way, please sit back, relax, and let's dive on in.
Okay, so the year is 1997, and my oh my, what a year that was. The film Titanic shatters box office records, Princess Diana meets an untimely and tragic end, the first Harry Potter book is published, and I am not playing Final Fantasy VII. My house was primarily a Nintendo house until the late 2000s, so I actually didn't play Final Fantasy VII until I was 17. By that time, its place in gaming culture was already well established. I knew what the game was, of course. What kid that played games at all didn't at least know what Final Fantasy? At the time, the only experience I've had with a Final Fantasy game was Crystal Chronicles for the GameCube, to which I was ardently, if not aggressively, told that Crystal Chronicles didn't count as a true Final Fantasy game. Aside from that, I knew of some of the core elements well enough. I knew who Cloud was, I knew who Tifa was, I even knew what the Buster Sword and Materia were, and I knew what happened to this girl. All of the more definitive parts of the game I could name off. It seemed the only thing missing was, well, me playing the game. Unfortunately, I didn't own a PlayStation. Enter the year 2008. I'm about to start my voluntary summer school, and my friend says he really wants me to play FF7 and see for myself how great the game is. He loans me a modded PSP with the game on it and tells me to have at it. I now had a means to play FF7, and even better, it was portable. So throughout the summer, one of the best summers of my life, I'm playing through this game in my downtime between classes and hanging out with friends, and I sank hours into it. I would discuss it with friends where I was at in the game's story, asking for tips, etc. In classic JRPG fashion, I wound up doing the side quests so much I forgot what the main story was by the time I came back to the plot. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and stay on topic. What were my first impressions of Cloud? Well, he was the main character of the game, so I'm supposed to root for him, right? Oh, he's a jerk protagonist. Great! I just love seeing those! If I had played this when it first came out as a kid, I probably wouldn't have noticed his bad attitude as much. Me playing this as a teenager that was surrounded by other, significantly more angsty teenagers did not give me a lot of patience for this character. Throughout most of the game, that was pretty much my opinion of him. He's the edgy, don't get too close to me type that we all know so well. I couldn't really find him to be likable. He seems woefully uninterested in what he's asked to do in the game. The other characters, like Barrett, tried to make him understand the plight and the stakes, but Cloud still rebuffs them. So by proxy, how are we supposed to feel? After all, Cloud is the main character, and what he wants should reflect our wants to an extent since we're spending most of the game with him. Or at the very least, he could be one's avatar for cynicism, and if he comes around, we'll come around too. If you pay close attention to the dialogue near the beginning, you do see that there are some cracks in his story, especially when we see his childhood friend, Tifa, is having some trouble discerning how he knows more than he should. Okay, brilliant! This sows the seeds for something we will unravel. Throughout the game, you meet more characters that were affected by the secondary antagonist, the Shinra Electric Power Company, and see what role it has played in the major plot points that make up Cloud's backstory. Over the course of the story, you and I, as the player, piece together the sequence of events, and finally emerges the real Cloud. And, well, he doesn't really change in that regard, for better or worse. My opinion of him at this point is about the same as it was in the beginning. He still acts the same way despite his revelation. He's still snarky, aloof, and almost dismissive of his role as the leader. Such an element was done even more humorously when Sid Highwind briefly becomes the leader. So I finished the game, and my views of Cloud are that he wasn't very good of a protagonist. I say that not because he wasn't interesting and didn't have an interesting backstory, but that his flaws as a character didn't make him more relatable or likable. I didn't find myself very drawn into his character so much as I was drawn to how his actions affected the other characters. So my final say pegged him to be a jerk, a non-likable jerk, and I told my friend as much when I returned his PSP. He told me to wait until I watched the companion film, Final Fantasy Advent Children. I watched the film shortly after, and while I still have no idea to this day what the hell I watched, don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoyed the film and have on repeat viewings, but I still don't think it's a very good film. It looks pretty, but maybe I was just expecting something else? I don't know, but this video isn't reviewing the film or the game. So after seeing what Cloud's character became, all I could really do is shake my head. So first he was a jerk, and now he's a quiet emo jerk that abandons his family. More on that later. Yeah, much better. And it takes the combined effort of ending a global pandemic, a mass kidnapping and rescuing of children, the re-emergence and subsequent defeat of his mortal enemy threatening to destroy the world, his dead friends' ghosts, and his allies coming out of the woodwork to make him realize, yeah, okay, life may be worth living after all. All the while maintaining that ever so stoic, brooding expression. Probably not hard to guess how I felt about him now. Though I admit I do enjoy the subtle ending. We go from someone that was cracking jokes and seemingly came to terms with the events in his life, and then goes to save the world, just for all of that to be abandoned in the film. And I pretty much held that viewpoint for years to come.
Before we can understand why someone likes or dislikes a character, it's a good idea to look critically at the character themselves. After all, it's not just about the character's history that makes them the way they are, it's how they react to and grow from it. Given what the game had already established, the film portrayal of Cloud seems to be out of place of the character. I mean, after all, Cloud seemed to be doing a lot better by the end of the Final Fantasy VII game. He regains his memories, he finds a reason to fight, and he got down with Tifa, that's my canon and I'm sticking with it, and he finds comfort and purpose in his friends. So what changed? Why throw all that away? Sometimes it takes years to truly understand why. Well, here's why. Because when you're too busy trying to do something important, you know, like saving the world from getting obliterated by a gigantic-ass meteor summoned by some megalomaniac having an existential crisis, you tend to focus on only that. So Cloud seemingly being in high enough spirits to keep going can be a callback to what he learned from Zack Fair while in his company, evidenced by the fact he's able to recall his conversation he had with Zack at the back of the truck. Then when the high of saving the world has worn off, and without something else as intense to occupy your time, it makes sense that one's demons will begin to eke their way back into your mind. So let's see, from where did Cloud's trauma stem? Well, a lot of places. His hometown getting burned down by his hero, being experimented on for 4 years by way of injection of some alien matter, his best friend dying in front of him while trying to save him, having a train ran on him in a brothel, that I'm not 100% sure he was cool with, then having yet another friend die in front of him, but I don't really care about her. And let's not forget, half of the aforementioned things happened before the events of the original game, when Cloud was only 16 years old. Moreover, the events even prior to those also show a young Cloud having issues connecting with other children. He was a loner child that had antisocial tendencies and didn't really get along with his neighbors. Even though Tifa would like to remember her being close friends with Cloud, a closer examination of their early relationship suggests that she was only kind to him when not in the company of her other friends. All of these things compounded with each other to suggest extremely deep-rooted issues that aren't likely to just go away no matter how many life-changing experiences you encounter. So chronologically, before Advent Children, there are some events that are elaborated on. There is a series of novellas that bridge the gap between the events of the game and Advent Children called On the Way to a Smile. In Tifa's novella, we see that Cloud does fall into deep depression not long after the events of the game, but feigns happiness, or at least complacency, for a while. Not surprisingly, he isn't good at socializing, he's not good at communicating, and he put up even more barriers around himself. All of this comes on the heels of the old team and the world trying to heal and move on from the crisis. This is when Tifa opens up her bar and Cloud works acquiring ingredients for it, throwing himself into his work. Much of Cloud's story in this point of view mirrors Tifa's. Both are haunted by their past, Tifa especially at the awful things she's done, but keeping busy trying to run a business keeps them both occupied from those thoughts. Not too different from the last part of the original game. Their minds are elsewhere instead of their inner turmoil. However, this time around, it's voluntary. It's a conscious decision and something they actively have to keep up themselves in order to perpetuate this distraction. This is something that I'm sure a lot of you have done, or at least know someone that has. Someone that keeps themselves busy because they're not ready to confront something. Shortly after opening the bar, Barrett decides he wants to go on his own soul search and leaves Marlene, his surrogate daughter, with them. Cloud acquires his motorcycle and he spends more time with Tifa and Marlene, seemingly acclimating to family life. Soon he starts his delivery business, and the family enjoys success with both businesses. Cloud's services are in high demand, and he can spend more time roaming the world and feeling free. And things start looking up. So what can go wrong? Well, business success didn't translate into happiness. Cloud is gone most of the time, and he starts becoming distant, often spacing out. And then it's later revealed that he had delivered something to the place where Aerith died, having once again to confront his past. During this time, Cloud starts to spend more and more time alone, and meets Denzel in Aerith's church and decides to take him in. Tifa accepts him, believing that Aerith sent him to them both, as a way for them to atone for their past since they were indirectly responsible for his parents' deaths. Cloud begins to bond with the boy, learning more about him and making a connection with him, and Cloud begins to open up to Tifa. I first read this novella when I was about 19, but didn't remember much of it. Other than that, if I hadn't known the events of Advent Children, this would be considered something of an optimistic ending. He's rebuilding his life, he seems to be able to cope with this trauma in a more healthy manner, and he can at least talk about parts of his past without shutting down completely. Except that isn't where the story ends. The way I saw it now is that he helps provide for his family, acting as emotional support to the household with Tifa being the anchor, brings another child in, gives a sense of security and love, and then he leaves again. He leaves 2 children behind, one of which he brought to the home, expecting Tifa to help take care of him. Now I know, some of you will reason that after he got ill, he didn't want the family to see him that way. But come on, I think disappearing without so much as a phone call while one of your surviving friends is taking care of 2 children and running a business by herself is not cool. And keep in mind, this is the last part of the story that I learned of in the lore. I was already familiar with the game and the film, so I knew what happened before and after this story. I guess I was wondering what the heck happened to Cloud in between the events that could make him so sad. Well, it took a lot of growing up and maturing to finally understand. I can look at this objectively and see that he was always sad. He didn't need to cry and be solemn all the time to show he was sad. He did that in other ways. He did it in the way he spoke to his comrades at the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. He did it in the way he comes to grips with his own mortality before the final fight. He did it in the way he withdrew from his friends after Meteor fell. If we look briefly at Tifa and her demons, when the dust cleared, she was horrified at what she had done when she was with Avalanche. She took to her extreme actions hook, line, and sinker, without realizing the rippling effect her actions would have. Avalanche took extreme measures to achieve their goal, and as such, many innocent people died. People that just wanted to go to work, support their family, and enjoy their lives as best they could, only to die because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Denzel's parents being one of the many victims. Tifa is able to atone in her own way by taking responsibility for her actions and taking care of one of her victims. Through this, she is able to heal and move forward. So why not Cloud? Well, because Cloud's inner demons and guilt don't revolve around what he did. They revolve around what he couldn't do. He couldn't make it into Soldier. He couldn't stop Sephiroth from destroying his home. He couldn't save Zack from getting gunned down. He couldn't stop the Sector 7 plate from falling. He couldn't break free of his mind control, and he couldn't tell Aerith to move 2 feet to the left. It's easier to atone for your past if you try to make things right for some of your wrongs. In Cloud's case, he can't. He can't bring people back from the dead, and he can't go back in time.
I'm not fit to help anyone.
I used to cringe so hard at this line because I wanted so much for Cloud to pick himself up and face the problems that were happening at that time. But now it perfectly encapsulates why he feels the way he does, and likely had this entire time. He didn't have any power to yield over the lives of others or even his own. Cloud piecing together his missing time and not even getting a chance to cope before facing more grief manifests in him being emotionally overwhelmed and knowing there isn't much he can do about it, except to accept that these things happened and that he doesn't have to face it alone. At its core, Cloud's character as the main protagonist of the game may not seem complex at first. The layers to his persona at first glance are few, as he's largely reactive throughout most of this story. Much of the questionable things he has done in the game, you later find out, are not even his own doing. Because of this, he has a lot of doubt and hesitation, especially in the later parts of the story, which can come off as frustrating as a player/viewer. But what can be expected when one spent a fourth of his lifetime in suspended animation and having some of his most recent memories not even be his? How can one come to terms with the trauma in the present day when most of your adult life up to that point is missing? Cloud, and by proxy, us the player, have to unravel all of his history while simultaneously taking on the guilt of knowing what part he played and didn't play in his own story. At the end of the game, Cloud seemingly does defeat his greatest adversary, both figuratively and literally. But to what end? It did not make everything right, and in the wake of his triumph, more problems emerged. And that's the central conflict in Advent Children. It'd be easy if everyone could reconcile their emotions by doing something tangible, but the growth and healing have to start from within, and trying to do better by moving forward. And Cloud is shown to begin this process at the end of Advent Children with that little smile. So Cloud Strife, I misjudged you and did so for a very long time. I wrote you off as nothing more than a boring, one-dimensional protagonist that then became an emo, sad jerk. But now, looking at your background in its entirety and reconciling the adversity you had to face, I understand why you are the way you are. Your story is a good reminder that everyone we meet in our lives is fighting an invisible battle we don't know anything about, and that you were fighting it every day in any way that you could, even if it wasn't always the right way. I was wrong about you, and for that, I apologize. Yes, I'm aware that he can't hear this, because he never checks his phone. FF7's world is full of diverse and interesting characters. Arguably, some are more interesting than the main characters. No, actually, the secondary characters are more interesting. Since the release of the extended lore, I've actually become quite fascinated with the antagonistic characters, mostly because you get to dive into their point of view and find some empathy for them. And while they definitely are still the bad guys, there is something, a lot of things, about the secondary antagonist that makes him one of my absolute favorite characters of all time. But that's a video for another day. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Harvey McLeod, and I'm here to make videos for you. And I'll see y'all next time.